Okay, so it's 7 p.m. So I think uh, we are good to go now. So we have Murli with us, and of course, I would be also taking a session here. So good evening, everyone, or hi, everyone, wherever you are. Thanks for joining in for today's session, in which we would um, look at the Kubernetes networking detail, and then have some demos on the kubectl plugins, which I will take later. So today's session, of course, as you know, that we have Murli as our speaker, and Murli is one of the author of a CNI plugin called KubeRouter. And I looked at the slides earlier, and I really see that okay, there's a great content in the slide what we are going to learn today. Um, so, few things. You can ask questions on the chat whenever you feel like, and we would take them towards the session, toward the session, or maybe in between. We really can decide on that, so that we can see what else. Yeah, so we could not live stream today. There is some issue. Anyway, that's there. That's okay. We still have a session getting recorded. So we'll put the recording later in the session in the meetup page, and then we'll share the slides of Murli's sessions as well. So I think we are good to go. Murli, feel free to kind of get started, share your screen and video maybe. I'll just mute myself and you can take over the control. Murli, can you share the screen, please? Okay, I need to stop sharing. Yeah, now go ahead. Yeah, Murli, we can't hear you.
1 second.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
You can hear me now?
Yes, yes. I think I
Okay.
did a mute for you from my side. That was the
Oh,
problem.
okay. So,
On the top right, you have a share button.
right. You can see the screen now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. So, let me... hi, everybody. Thanks for joining this webinar on Kubernetes networking. So, just a little bit of intro about me. I have like over 20 years of development experience, and last 10 years I've been particularly working on cloud networking. So I was fortunate to start my cloud and in particular cloud networking journey like 10 years back, where I worked for a startup which pioneered the cloud orchestration platform. There I sort of early stage got a sense of this cloud networking, and then I worked on a bit of SDN controllers. Those who are coming from telco background know about this NFV. So I worked on a little bit of NFV orchestrators. So last 4 years, particularly, I've been working on Kubernetes networking. And lately, I also started a little bit of dabbling into the 5G cloud native mobile networks. So like Nipendra mentioned, I am the author of KubeRouter, which is a sort of a turnkey networking solution for Kubernetes. And I also was a VMnet. It's one of the CNIs. I was also a maintainer for almost 1.5 years. I have content which is mixed. Some bits of it are introductory, bit of it are a little bit advanced. So feel free to ask questions, or you can find me on this Murli.reddy and Kubernetes Slack. You can also find me in KubeRouter Slack channel. Okay, so what I'm going to do is primarily cover the basic constructs in the Kubernetes networking. If you know API resources, so basically there are only a few bunch of API resources corresponding to network. I'll go very detailed into those aspects. Then we have things like service mesh, multi-cluster networking. So there are various areas which are not exactly in the purview of Kubernetes formal specification, but they are developed externally by various means. Just because Kubernetes is an extensible platform through CRDs, the many of the networking functionality have been added into Kubernetes. I'll briefly touch upon them, but it's no means exhaustive. That there is a bunch of activity or the KEPs being proposed and the Kubernetes networking being enhanced, like things like dual stack, cluster level services, network policy, stuff like that. Just to set the context of where Kubernetes networking, why it is the way it is, just briefly, I summarized a couple of points, how things have evolved over a decade and a half. So if you are working in the industry for long enough, you know how mid of 2000, how the shift from monolith apps to microservices has started, and also how the cloud in general, the paradigm of cloud started. So along with that, the various changes came into the networking models. So I briefly touched upon a couple of points, and you can appreciate how they reflect in the Kubernetes model. So when so a lot of these hyperscale companies like Google's, Amazon's, they for their networking requirements, the existing middlewares like load balancer, they cannot scale to that extent. So they had to innovate in a way. It was done with commodity servers, and it's a purely software solutions or plain Linux. So the middle boxes, what is called as a middle boxes, were sort of got replaced by software-driven appliances, and a centralized to a distributed load balancers and firewall sort of things emerged. And also, typically, all the network functionality was done in the edge of the network, like the edge of the perimeter. So as the VMs and containers started evolving, the node that is running the containers or the VMs has itself become a network proxy or sort of networking functionality enabler. And things have evolved. If you know, earlier it was mostly networking was mostly a CLI or configuration driven, and the industry has evolved to a place where it's about intent driven. Like you declaratively tell what the intent is as an application owner, and that translates to the network configuration. So I'll map some of the things in Kubernetes to these kind of industry-wide, beyond Kubernetes things that happen to network industry. So this picture, I try to capture the very conceptual view of a typical cluster. You have a bunch of services, which is for high availability and for scalability. You run bunch of instances. It could be VMs or pods as a service, and you have bunch of services in a cluster which wants to talk to each other. And you also have, you want to expose the services to external world. So the external clients need to access those services. And not all of the deployments are greenfield deployment. So you end up with a kind of hybrid deployment where you have services outside the Kubernetes cluster which want to access the services inside the cluster, but they are in the same trust domain, say a data center or VPC. So Kubernetes was primarily built like 6 years back with the mostly with catering to this model, a single cluster in which all the constructs in the Kubernetes are confined to a cluster. It doesn't touch upon anything beyond that. But the reality as of today is it has evolved, or at least the demand is people want to run multi clusters with hybrid. In the hybrid meaning they want some clusters in the cloud, some clusters on the on-prem, and some clusters in AWS, some clusters in GKE. So the reality is this is what users are trying to run their Kubernetes workloads. So I'll in the end of the session I'll touch upon how things are either retrofitted or trying to achieve this kind of multi-cluster scenario. Okay, so let me go back to this slide. So I would like to establish certain terminology. When you have services within a cluster talking to each other, are called as that sort of traffic is called as east-west traffic. And when you have a traffic that external clients are out of cluster clients, but within a trust domain, they are trying to access the services. So these sort of traffic is called north-south traffic. So the things that are concerning for east-west traffic is you have to basically establish the basic thing is the pod-to-pod connectivity. Then you have things like service discovery, load balancing, network security, encryption. These are the things that you are the requirements for achieving the east-west traffic or service calls within a cluster. Now, when you come the external clients accessing the services within a cluster, you have various other concerns to deal with: authentication, auditing, authorization, and you have a L7 load balancing, API gateways. And for both traffic, you have things like observability. Okay, now I'll start drill down into each of this topic. So if you have already used Kubernetes, the thing that you would realize is there is no notion of network. There is no first-class API called network. If you're coming from any other clouds or cloud orchestration platforms, you would typically see APIs like to create a VPC or create a network. So it was a deliberate model in which the network itself is not a first-class entity in Kubernetes APIs, but it has certain basic requirements. That's all what Kubernetes expects. So what it says is across the clusters, any pod can talk to any pod running on any node without going through the NAT. So it's a flat network of pods where any pod can talk to any pod, and any node can talk to any pod. So these requirements will become clear when you visit the load balancer sort of services, why these are the requirements that you would want. So in this diagram, essentially it means that like a pod 10.1.1.2 can talk to 10.1.2.2 and vice versa. And node 1 can talk to the containers across the clusters. So this is all the requirement that Kubernetes has. So the first level of thing that we need to understand is how pod-to-pod this requirement can be met, which is pod-to-pod connectivity. If you know the southbound extensions to Kubernetes, we have three primary interfaces. One is CRI, CSI, and the CNI, which respectively deals with the runtime and storage and networking. So CNI is the primary specification, which is an extension point. Anybody can write a extension or a plugin sort of thing which conforms to the CNI specification and establishes pod-to-pod connectivity. So there are a whole bunch of CNI implementations. They broadly fall into these three categories. So you have solutions which use overlay networks like Weave and Flannel VXLAN solution. And you have direct routing where Calico, KubeRouter, Flannel's host gateway, backend sort of things such as that. And then you have a new breed of CNIs which are exclusively meant to be used in a cloud environment like Azure CNI and AWS VPC CNI. So I'll dig deep into these three models. So let's see this overlay pod networking model. So you have pod A running on node A and pod B running on node B. So essentially the overlay network means it's a logical network, meaning traffic going that logical network is never seen by the underneath physical network. So let's run through a case. So the pod A wants to talk to pod B, in which case what happened is the traffic get encapsulated uh, in a VXLAN or IP tunnel sort of thing. If you see the packet here, so it got encapsulated with source and destination as node A, node B, and that traffic goes to the destination node and then get decapsulated, and then the traffic goes to the pod B. So this is a overlay model. The physical network would never see the traffic coming from the pods. So when would you use overlay networks? So you have things like VXLAN, IP/IP tunneling, GRE tunneling, various modes of encapsulation. So this is useful when, for various reasons, you don't want your physical network to see that pod-to-pod traffic. You want to treat that traffic as a virtualized traffic. So in which case, it is advisable to use overlay network. And it is strictly imposed in some of the cloud providers where you can't have this sort of encapsulation. Uh, for example, in AWS, if I run two pods and allow them to talk to each other or VPC, they get dropped because the AWS has a certain anti-spoofing rules which think that okay, this is not the traffic that is I am expecting from this node, and it will drop the traffic, what is called as a source destination checks. When you can overcome it, but there are rules which for various reasons people might not want to see the pod-to-pod traffic onto the physical network. The downside to this approach is you have encapsulation overhead, which might result in a little bit of a drop in throughput. The second type of pod-to-pod connectivity is called as a direct routing, wherein you have a traffic from pod A to pod B in this example. It goes as is to the physical network. So the node is going to do a route lookup, and it's the responsibility of CNI to establish this routing table across the nodes in the cluster where they're pre-populated, saying that pod B can be reached through node B, in which case it's just pure Linux routing that is happening here, and traffic goes to the node B and then eventually goes to the destination pod. And okay, so this model is a right way to go in bare metal deployments where you want to have a massive scale clusters. You have clusters spanning across data centers, in which case the standard routing protocol that is typically used is a BGP, which like the node can run a BGP daemon, which sort of advertises the pod IPs to the L3 layer 3 routing infrastructure. So in which case, in this example, the pod A and pod B are trying to talk to each other across a layer 3 network, which could be even across the data centers. So the routing is done by the core your routing infrastructure. So it get routed by the routing infrastructure. So This is suitable for on-premise clusters, and there is no encapsulation. And what it gives is the ability to access pod anywhere in your network. Both services and pods can be accessed directly from outside the Kubernetes cluster. And this is a natural choice for multi-cluster scenario, which I'll cover later. And this is the typical way to achieve massive scale on-premise clusters. If you want to achieve that, the BGP-based direct routing is the way to go. And you also have I mentioned the new breed of CNIs, which are exclusively meant to be run in the cloud scenario. In this example, I just picked up the AWS. AWS has a notion of VPC router, which routes the traffic across the subnets. AWS was designed for VMs, but now you can run the pods as well on the VMs. And in addition, what they have done is the pod can be a first class entity in their AWS API, meaning you could use all their networking services like ALB, ELB directly with pods. So in this diagram, okay, I didn't put. Okay, so basically the routing happens through the VPC router, and you can directly hook pods to the ELB's sort of load balancers. So, so the basic the API resources are very thin. Like there's only 5 of them in as of now. You have services, endpoints, and there is a new resource called endpoint slices, and ingress and network policy. So this is all what you have as a formal specification from Kubernetes. But like I said, uh, the various other networking functionalities are achieved through CRDs, but they are not part of the formal specification. So let's revisit this slide where we want to achieve this service talking to another service within the cluster. Any questions? Anybody has any questions? Okay. Nipendra?
Yes, Murli.
So let me know if there are any questions. I am projecting full screen. So if you have any questions, just interrupt me.
Sure, sure. There's a question on the chat now. Can we just
Okay.
chat now?
Okay. What's that? Okay. So the question is, where does eVPF based CNI fall in this category? So you could achieve like, I mean, like the connectivity wise, you don't need eBPF, but when I explain the services and the network policy implementation, I can actually cover that part where how eBPF can help to make things faster. Okay, so let's stop. So yeah, so I let's see how we can achieve this service to service communication within the cluster, or what I refer to as a east west traffic. So I think most of you would be familiar with general idea of load balancing, but let me cover that in the context of Kubernetes. So now you have a pod, that client pod, that is trying to consume a service offered by another application. And for for high availability and scalability, you typically run multiple instances of that application as a multiple pod which are serving that particular app. Now, the question is, how do we figure which IP, how do client figure which IP to connect to, which one to connect to, because the pods itself are ephemeral. They keep you can the parts get scaled up, scaled down, and some of the parts can become unresponsive. In this context, how a client can talk to the service. So like, so the in this case, like part 3 got deleted, or the new part come up, and some of the parts are not responding, sort of thing. So So what Kubernetes has done is basically worked around the problem where client don't need to talk directly to the pods. So by introducing an abstraction called a service, so we, which sort of virtualizes the all the pods that are running for that app. So client connects to the abstract service, and the idea is that service hides all the backend details. When I say backend details, in typically you in load balancer scenario, you have health checks that uh, being done on the workload. You need to maintain what are the active set of workloads. So all that sort of details are hidden by this service abstraction. So typically, this is how you deploy a service, where you kind of specify the name for the service and the selector. This is a critical primitive that is available in Kubernetes, where you can label the parts, and the selector sort of groups the collection of parts which with similar labels. So this is how a service object looks like, where you can specify the name, the selector, and the port on which the service need to be available. The target port is where the pod is actually listening, and the the port 80 here is sort of virtualizing it. It's a single well-known port that sort of maps to the pod's port. So once you deploy the service, you kind of end up with once you deploy a service, and if you see the service object, you would end up seeing an IP gets assigned to a service. This is represented as a cluster IP here. So it's basically a VIP, what you call as a VIP, virtual IP for this service. In the context of Kubernetes, it's called as a cluster IP. So let's see how this service abstraction fit into the two aspects: service discovery and load balancing. So once you deploy a service with certain name, here in this case my service, it gets a DNS name, a fully qualified DNS name, which can be resolved across the cluster by any pod. So the DNS resolution gives you the cluster IP that got allocated for the service. So let's see how the data path works, both service discovery and load balancing in this case. So in this case, I have a pod running a node that wants to access a service. So the app running in the pod sends a DNS query to resolve a service name. And the core DNS is a in-cluster DNS service that get deployed in most cases, which resolves the service name to a particular cluster IP. DNS returns the service VIP, and the pod accesses that cluster IP, which get load balanced to the one of the pods running the service. So if you can see here, there is a component that is running on the node, which is acting as a load balancer, basically a service proxy. So remember, if I in the beginning I told the idea of distributed load balancer. In Kubernetes, essentially your whole cluster of nodes are acting as a distributed load balancer. Each node is running a local load balancer. As you can see here, the pod to reach that service, once it resolved to a particular IP for that service, the service proxy here load balance the traffic to one of the pods running in that particular service. Okay, so this is essentially the idea of service in the Kubernetes. So there is also one more resource called endpoint. Uh, it's typically users don't use this resource, like you don't apply it, but it gets created as a, whenever you deploy a service, this endpoint resource object also gets created. Basically, it represents the current set of active pods behind that service, and user don't need to manage it. It's managed by the Kubernetes control plane. So later I'll touch upon this endpoint, how it can be used to extend the load balancing to the the workloads that can be residing outside the cluster. So if you are familiar with control plane of Kubernetes, this is what happens underneath. On every node, you have a proxy which is watching for the updates to service and endpoint resources. And similarly, a DNS, which is core DNS, is watching out if any new service is getting created. And there are two control plane components, service controller and endpoints controller. So they work in hand together to achieve the seamless service discovery and the load balancing. For example, once you apply a service to the API server, the service controller sort of assigns the cluster IP to the service. And once the service object gets updated, the DNS server, which is watching the service object, automatically populates the DNS record for the service. And the endpoints controller start watching which pods are active, which are failing health checks, and populates the endpoint object. And the proxy running on the node eventually picks up the service object and endpoint details and configures itself to support that load balancer locally on the node. So there are certain tricks that you could achieve, maybe not very regular case, but like you could have a services without pod selector. So what it caters to is, like I said, you kind of end up with the hybrid deployments where you have certain services which Kubernetes in cluster pods need to access. So you kind of have a service object which without pod selector, meaning there's external service, but you can populate with a particular IP so that it still get resolved from cluster DNS. So there is a seamless way the cluster workloads can access in cluster and out of cluster services. Okay, so I hope it at least gives some sense of two aspects at this point. I walked through how a pod to pod connectivity, or rather how a pod can talk to another pod using CNIs, which using overlays or direct routing or using cloud networking artifacts, how a pod can talk to another pod. And expanding that, I walked you through how the services can talk to another services, basically the discovery and load balancing part. So now the second aspect is how external clients can access services within the cluster. So what I refer to as a north-south traffic. So you have various type of services. I covered the cluster IP part. Then you have the node port, load balancer, and then you can give external name, and you can also have services with external IP. So the last four bullets are some of the means you can allow traffic into the cluster. So I'll just walk through some examples. So in this example, a client is outside the cluster, which it wants to access a service within a cluster, within a cluster. So one of the option you have is node port. Basically, what it means is each node, like I mentioned, is running as part of a distributed load balancer. So each node is a load balancer itself. So a client can reach any node on a certain port which is allocated for that service, and the node or service proxy running on that node load balances to uh, the endpoint or pod. In this case, if you see the client access the destination, if you see it's a node IP 10.1.1.2, and it gets proxied or load balanced to the destination pod, which is 1123. So this is one way of doing it. If you have observed, uh, the source got changed when it got load balanced, which is 10. If you see the source is here 10.1.1.2. So what happened is just the way the the service proxy on the node works, it has to SNAT the traffic, meaning once the traffic from client comes to the node and it gets forwarded to the certain pod, the reverse traffic has to go through that node to SNAT back the traffic. So due to which the source IP gets changed. So there is a way to, I mean, if you ask why do we care about source IP, there for various reasons. You do want to know where the traffic coming from to enforce network policies or uh, to get that identity sort of thing. So there is a little uh, attribute which you can set for the service object, which basically ensures that a node load balances traffic only to the pods running if they are running on that node. I mean, it's not going to forward to any other node, so it still preserves the client IP. So yeah, so node port is a construct where it's a means to uh, let the traffic come into the cluster. So the node itself is accessible from outside, so there's no expectation on the infrastructure to how to bring in the traffic. But the problem is you get a certain specific ports on which the service is available, so it cannot be a well-known port kind of thing. And the problem is how do client know which node to connect? And again, nodes can be ephemeral, like they can be scaled out, scaled down. So it's a difficulty for client to know which node to connect. Okay, so other alternative is load balancer, a traffic type of load balancer, and it's primarily was targeted for the cloud environments like AWS and GKE, but you could achieve it on the bare metal. First, I'll walk through how it works in the cloud environment. When I say cloud environment, essentially AWS GK sort of thing. Like you have ELB, elastic load balancer in AWS. So when you deploy a service, with of type load balancer, they when you run on a cloud, you have a cloud control manager for each of the clouds. Like AWS gets a certain cloud provider, GKE has a certain cloud provider, which sorts of uh, provisions a elastic load balancer IP and assigns to a service. So in this case, the client access that particular VIP, and it get it's a two-hop kind of solution. First, the client access the cloud load balancer, and then it it get load balanced to the node, which is node port, and then traffic goes to the pod. So it's a multiple hops to between client and the destination pod. You could also have a case where, like I said, the Kubernetes pod can be a first-class entity in some of the clouds like AWS, where the pod is directly it gets a IP from the the cloud network like VPC, in which case the client access the VIP and we get directly load balanced to the pod without going through the node port. So, these are little bit advanced topics. I'm not sure. I mean, if you have any questions, please ask me end of the presentation, or you can ping me on the Slack later. Basically, if you plan to run a Kubernetes cluster on premise, more likely you will run up in this scenario, and this is a natural fit for uh, to run Kubernetes cluster on prem. So how do so essentially the thing that we are trying to understand is how do we bring traffic into the cluster using service type of load balancer. And
Murali,
yeah,
there's a question regarding the VIP section. So there's confusion about the VIP, what you mentioned about the load balancer IP and the service IP. So can you give
is
me
this with different and so uh, there are couple of IPs that get assigned to any service. One is cluster IP, and on top of it, based on the type of the service, you could get additional IPs. In this case, there is a load balancer IP. There could be external IP, which are additional IPs than the basic cluster IP. Bhaskar, and did that answer your question? Okay, thanks. So yeah. So in this case, what happens is you sort of run a routing protocol. In this case, I have represented with BGP, but you could use alternative routing protocols. So what how it works is each node advertises that this is the service IP I can reach to, so you can send the traffic to me. So across the cluster, each node advertises that I can reach this particular service VIP, and the L3 router has now bunch of or essentially all the nodes as a next hop for the particular service VIP. So when a client sends traffic to a particular VIP, the router does a load balancing, which is called as a ECMP, equal cost multipath load balancing. So in which case, what happens is client sends the traffic to L3 router. Client doesn't know the uh, how the network is, but the routers know where can I reach to, how can I reach to this particular VP, and it sort of load balances to one of the node, and each node then the local service proxy running on the node load balances to the one of the endpoints corresponding to that service. Okay, so okay, there is some error in the title. Let me correct that when I upload the slides. So the alternative way is, I mean, you don't necessarily have luxury of running BGP, and in many cases the network ops guys are paranoid of nodes advertising random routes, so they may not allow you to such kind of topology. In which case, you could use a more yeah sorry okay, so you could use more conventional way where if you familiar with VRRP, basically you assign that VIP to one of the nodes, and at least minimum two nodes forms a pair in which one node is active and another is standby, and they run the VRRP protocol, where if one node goes down, another node picks up that VIP. So what happens in this case is a VIP is configured on the node, and when routers ask for a ARP resolution, it's going to respond with, hey, you can reach this IP with this MAC. Essentially, what it means is send all the traffic for this VIP uh, to this node, sort of thing. So client sends the traffic, and by virtue of ARP response, it directly sends the traffic to the node. So the load balancer part was sort of gray area for quite a while, because it was uh, it was primarily done for cloud scenarios, but now you have various options in which you can achieve very effective load balancers on prem. So you have solutions like Metal LB, and if you are using BGP, you can use Calico or Cube Router. So, so far, what I've covered is how you achieve the pod-to-pod connectivity, and then extending that, how service to service discovery and load balancing happen. And then I also covered how you let traffic come into the cluster by the service type of node port and load balancers. Now, as I mentioned earlier, what you have is a flat network, meaning any pod can talk to anybody. So in which case, and there is no strict notion of tenancy or multi-tenancy as well in Kubernetes. So how do we uh, restrict that particular workload only can be reached by a particular set of workloads? So So it's a what Kubernetes supports is something called network policies. It's a declarative way to express your intent. Like it's basically if you're running certain set of services in the cluster, it is sort of a call graph, like which service can talk to which service, and that you express as a network policy object, and then uh, let the implementation of network policies realize that. Just like services, again, this works on label selector primitive, and these policies are meant for the app owners. Meaning, it's as a service developer, I can define who can talk to me. So it's not a cluster or network level policies. So let's run through an example. In this case, we had two set of workloads. One is front end and back end, and we want to restrict only front end parts that can reach back end, and the second restriction is front end can only send traffic to the back end parts. So typically the way it works is the user applies the network policy with expressing the intent that front end parts can talk to back end parts and back end parts can only receive front end parts. So once you apply the API server object, uh, just like the way the whole cluster is acting as a distributed load balancer, here again the whole cluster of nodes are acting as a distributed firewall. I mean, this is a like paradigm shift from the previous generation of networks where you have the firewall sitting on edge of the network where the whole traffic goes to the firewall and then get either filtered out or permitted. So there is a shift here where the whole cluster is a distributed firewall. I mean, this is the only way you can achieve massive scales. So once you apply the network policy object, on each node you have a component watching out for the policy object, and so when it gets notification of new policies getting created, deleted, it's going to configure self to achieve the desired state. If you know the whole the construct of controller in Kubernetes, it's basically all the controllers are trying to sync the actual state to desired state. What it means is, in this case, for example, there should be a firewall controller that is running on the node, which is watching out for API server updates, and it is sort of configuring itself to achieve what is intended. In this case, front end talks to backend, and backend can receive the traffic from. So someone asked a question: where does eBPF fit into this? So let's say in this case, I have a controller, it gets the update. Now you want to realize that what is intended, which is only certain parts can talk to certain parts. So if it is a Linux, you have technologies like IP tables, NF tables, and eBPF. So some of the implementation use IP tables, and some of them, like for instance, Cilium uses eBPF to achieve this sort of filtering. So in this example, suppose the pod one front end pod one sends traffic to backend pod two. The kernel has to make a check: can this be allowed? So that is already configured by the controller running on that node. And where does Cilium fit here, or eBPF fit in here? It's just a realization of intent. I mean, the eBPF itself is not dramatically adding new use cases here, but it's just an enabler to achieve the intent that is expressed in Kubernetes API. So the check is made on both source node and destination node, which is essentially maps to the egress policy checking and as well ingress policy, ingress traffic and egress traffic checking. Okay. So, so the last API object that I will like to touch upon is ingress object. So far, whatever we have seen, starting from service discovery, load balancing, and network policies, they are all are layer 4, like basically services which are defined as a TCP or UDP services. But as you know, microservices are going more and more HTTP2 or gRPC sort of communication models. So you need a way to express certain layer 7 aspects in Kubernetes API. So ingress is one of the attempts. There's effort to change it and it's sort of probably not fitting into the larger context of things. But as of now, the where it stands, what it achieves is it kind of routes uh, traffic to particular service based on path or a virtual name sort of constructs. So just mind you, this is not any particular type of service. I mean, it is still realized either by type service type load balancer or node node port. So this is essentially what it is. Like I want to have a host name in which path foo get traffic get routed to particular service, realizing that foo. If it is slash bar, I want to route the traffic to particular service, set of parts realizing that service. There is uh, I'll touch upon some of the aspects to wind up the presentation. So there is API gateway, which is not a formal Kubernetes API, but it is a predominant pattern in microservices world. So it's a way of consolidating all the concerns of external clients trying to reach certain APIs in the cluster. So things like how do I rate limit, how do I authenticate, authorize, all sorts of concerns that relate to external clients accessing services or rather APIs in the cluster. So it sort of overlaps with some of the ingress. There are implementation like Kong, Ambassador, which doubles up both as a API gateway and ingress controller. So lastly, I want to end up with just briefly allude to the what this service mesh. I mean, this itself is a long topic, but what service mesh and why it is becoming so hot, or rather very critical piece in the Kubernetes infrastructure. So far as we walk through all the Kubernetes construct, uh, there's these are the certain missing things. Like when a pod talks to another pod, like how do I ensure the identity? Like how do I know that pod A is claiming to be who it is, or access control, who can send or receive. When pod-to-pod connectivity across the node, how do I do the encryption, traffic management, telemetry? So these are all sort of issues which are cross-cutting concerns when services talk to each other in a microservices world, which Kubernetes doesn't address. As I mentioned, it only primarily deals with layer 4, and layer 7 only partially it addresses, but service mesh falls right into the layer 7 domain, achieving all these concerns related to service communication. So, okay, just to conclude the presentation, like I mentioned in the beginning, all the constructs in Kubernetes are primarily designed with a uh, intent for a single cluster. Now, you have a scenario where you have clusters running different workloads on different cloud providers and also on on-prem data center. Now, but I do want to have a case where service A running in AWS can talk to service C running on GKA, and they both can talk to service running on-prem. So, like this is one large gray area where uh, the SIG network is trying to come up with certain extensions to the basic core resources, which can define this sort of patterns. But at the same time, you could always extend with CRDs. But having said that, you can still the I kind of mentioned some of the service constructs which let you uh, update the endpoints out of band. So what you can still do is you could reflect the services in one cluster into another cluster. I mean, it's not neat, but there are solutions coming up where you mirror services in one cluster to another cluster, and then by virtue of the local DNS, they can just work as if they are part of a larger pool of clusters. But you also have a set of challenges like how do I ensure network policies? How do I track the identity stuff like that? It's a ongoing effort, but this is where most of the challenges were in the Kubernetes networking happening, and service mesh sort of addresses this aspect to some extent. So that's all for this presentation. Like you mentioned, you can, if you have any questions, I can take it if I'm not running over time.
No, we have time. Please go ahead and answer questions. Yeah. We can go from the top so that you can see some of
Right,
my
right,
answers.
right. So Giri Prasad asked, Metal LB is one option to bring. How is that different from BGP? So Metal LB has two uh, two different ways of achieving load balancer functionality. One is what you mentioned as BGP CMP. It is still a uses BGP underneath. So if you deploy Metal LB, it's going to run as a daemon set, and each node is going to advertise load balancer IP to the L3 routers, and then L3 routers does the ECMP. That's one uh, facet of Metal LB. For obvious reasons, you can't use BGP, so it uses what is called as a L2 mode, in which out of all the nodes, one node get picked up as a host for the VIP, and it sort of responds to the ARP request. And if the node fails, it picks up another node. But the only difference it doesn't use VRRP. It's basically relies upon the Kubernetes leader election or node health check sort of things to detect that node has gone down and achieve that active standby VIP thing. So who configure VIP on the node? So you need to have some controller running on each of the node, watching out for the service object. So when I mean, I'm just answering this particular question. So when load balance, I mean, when service gets updated with the particular load balancer IP, all nodes, the the controller which is running on all the node coordinate and pick one among one of them and configures locally in one of the interface. Kube proxy with IP tables or IP.
I answer that later.
Okay, okay. So Shubham Soni asked the question: Identity management can be done using network policies. Then why service mesh? So, like I said earlier, uh, I mean, network policies doesn't even go to the level of pod IPs. They don't. It's a very declarative intent, meaning they're only telling the labels. So within your namespace, you can deploy a pod sort of matching to that labels, and uh, you could. I mean, you could. I mean, you could still you can do things like spoofing or various means to impersonate certain traffic. So that's exactly what identity management is. Network policies doesn't cater to that sort of thing. like if I when you take service mesh, it does a mutual TLS. Like it's a the multi-layer security. At basic layer, the intent is uh, emphasized by network policies. And once that is realized, a person, I mean, a pod can still spoof and probably sending the traffic. So they need to identify that yes, I am the actual person. In which case, they have to produce the certificate, which is what service mesh does, wherein you can have a mutual TLS. So each of them identifies with each other, each both the communicating services. So I mean, these general comments, I guess, multi-cluster and so Girish asked the question, can you talk more about multi-cluster networking? So if it is on-prem, like I briefly touched earlier, if you use direct routing where each cluster, each node advertises the ports that it running to the L3 routers, and your whole L3 fabric seamlessly is aware of all the parts across all the clusters. So it just naturally fits into the whole the network. Part to part communication can happen across the clusters. And if you use BGP, you could use KubeRouter or Calico. These are the only two providers of this functionality as of now. So basically, you can advertise the services as well. So a VIP from a cluster one is advertised across your network. So the the I mean across the cluster, service to service communication also just falls naturally if you use BGP. So Neha, in on-prem with service mesh, there exists requirement to have a load balancer for ingress gateway as well. Yeah, I think yes. I am not very sure. Neha, maybe you can ping me on Slack. Maybe I can discuss a little bit about this. For ingress, since it's layer 7 routing. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to answer these questions. It's too specific. If there are any conceptual questions we can go over? Can service mesh like Linkerd be set up? So I am not sure. So there are pros and cons to run as a sidecar or a node as a daemon uh, on the node. I am not too familiar with Linkerd internals, how they achieve the service mesh thing. Yeah, if there are no further questions, I mean, feel free to ping me on Slack if you have anything to discuss or if I can point you at any of the documentations.
Thanks, Murli. I think I definitely got something good things from this session, and I assume that a lot of other people would have also learned something new in the session for sure. So, thanks for your time, Murli,
Yeah,
and
thanks, Nitin.
we'll definitely reach out if there are any questions there. We'll upload
Sure,
the
sure.
slides, videos uh, in a couple of days there. Just hang in there.
Okay.
You'll have everything there. Um, yeah, so with that, I'll take over a small session on kubectl plugins. It's not going to be too deep as Murli has gone today. And I really appreciate these kind of deep dive sessions where we can get some of these questions there. Okay, so Mario from Hijan from South America, and yeah, thanks for putting the note there, Mario. Okay, so let me go over now. Murli can unshare the screen now. I can share mine, and then we can get going. The just above my photo, there would be a button to unshare the screen, I believe. Yeah, let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to cover a session on kubectl, kubectl plugins there. So before we dive into that, let me introduce myself. My name is Deependra, as you were known by now, and I'm founder at CloudUga, and we have been providing training and consulting for corporates and individuals for around 5 years now in the space of Kubernetes, Stio, Prometheus, and so on here. I authored the CNCF's intro course on Kubernetes, which is on the CNCF website on edX. And it's been taken by more than 150K users now. It's 100K. And I'm also a CNCF ambassador, a CK, and have previous experience in different companies before I started CloudUga. I wrote a book on Docker in 2015, which seems ages now, and ran the Docker meetup in Bangalore previously as well. So that's a quick intro. So I don't have any slides per se. I would go over some of the things from this website itself, and then we will jump into some demos here. Um, so we already have a command of kubectl, and we have a bunch of subcommands to that. Why we need additional things or plugins on top of that one, right? So plugins, as we know, right, they just kind of extend the functionality of a given tool or a given software. So that's what plugins do here in kubectl. We extend it for further um, for our use case. For example, my use case is I want to list down everything in a given namespace. So you might say I do kubectl get all, I get everything, but do you get the listing of service accounts there? No. And suppose I want to kind of get that kind of information there. I want to find a given user is bound to which roles and role bindings there. How can I find that? So these information are available in Kubernetes somewhere, but how do you easily find it and use that? And that's what these plugins are meant for. That you extend Kubernetes to do something which is not available, and you want to extend maybe for your own purpose, which can be as simple as that. Let's say if I say kubectl um, change ns, it changed my namespace there, something like that. So that we can achieve with that. So so there is a bunch of plugins are available that can be used, and let me go over those list here. Yeah, so if you list up these plugins here, there are I think around 129 plugins are available. Okay, this is the same page. Yeah, plugin indexes here. So if you look at here, let's just see. So there are, I don't know the count here, but yeah, as you can see, there are way too many plugins are available which can be used for our purpose. And I'll give some demos to you. And as there are plugins, you can also write your own as well. Suppose you want to make your own plugin with your own commands to sound certain stuff here. So you can also write your own plugin. And there's a small how to on the website here. So you can write your own plugin in different languages and then use that. So yeah, so these are there, and there's a special plugin called Crew, using which we can manage other plugins. So what we can do is we can have kubectl, and then we can install this Crew, and then Crew can basically manage multiple of such plugins there. So we would use Crew to kind of install some of these plugins and use them. Yeah. I hope by the time there shouldn't be any questions, but let's see. was not expecting any. Okay, so anyway, so let's try to kind of go and look at some of these plugins in action here. Installing these plugins are very simple. Once you kind of install the Crew, you can just run a couple of these commands, and then your things would be up. So you would have this Crew installed, and so I've already set up that thing here. So if I do kubectl Crew search here, I can list all the plugins which are available on my environment, not the environment, which are available in the repository of plugins, and I can use them and start kind of download them and start using them. So I'll go over at least some of these. These I kind of find useful as doing my research there. And once you kind of get hang of these, you would know that they are very useful, and then you might want to explore further and so on here. So let's go over let's go over them. So one of the plugin is called example plugin. So suppose the problem statement here is you are kind of trying to you are new to Kubernetes, and you are kind of want to write configs, different configs of different YAMLs. Like for example, you want to write a config for config map, secrets, PV, PVC, and all that stuff. Sometimes you don't remember, and you need to copy paste from somewhere outside, right? So what this plugin of example can do, it can give you kind of the template which you can modify. So for example here, I think already have this plugin, but yeah, I can just install them right now if it is not there. So what's happening now is I'm trying to kind of go to that repository of plugins and downloading the example plugin here. And once I have that, I can look at the help of that for sure. But yeah, so let's just do that quickly. Look at the help here. And it says simple. You can say example and resource name. So I can say example and the resource name here, and you can see that it is now dumping me the ingress YAML file or a config map YAML file, right? So you get this kind of very simple thing, but they can be very time saving for you as well, because while you're working it, you want to just get the YAML file created, you just get it. The next plugin is get all. As I told you earlier, let's say I want to get everything in my namespace. I want to get config maps and everything in place. So how can I get it? So I'm going to install this plugin now, and let me see if I just do kubectl get all. Let's see what I would get. Yeah, it's been installed, and yeah, as you can see, that kind of when I do get all, it kind of gives me all the information, right? A lot of information is here, but let me kind of bound to a given namespace here. So if I do this here, you can see that for a given, it kind of gives me all the information about the namespace. Currently, I don't have anything there. I don't think there are any pods running in that namespace and so on. Nothing is there, but as you can see, it still lists some of the stuff which were not there available by default. If I do get all not there, what's the command for that? kubectl. That's the thing, right? Okay. Anyway, I might be wrong here, but yeah, it kind of giving you more information than what you would typically get. Now, for example, if I do create a deployment here, and now I want to find out what all got created in the last 1 minute, right? So I can run this command. It kind of gives me, okay, in last 1 minute, these things have happened. So this kind of again becomes very useful for me when I'm doing any of the debugging or any of the things which I want to find more information about. There is a plugin called namespace. So I can quickly switch my namespace when I'm working on the environment, right? So let me install this plugin here. It's been there. Now, if I look at, so if I change my namespace to kubesystem, for example, so if I say kubectl namespace kubesystem, so currently my namespace is default, right? As you would know, right? As I'm in the default namespace, what I'm listing in the default namespace only. Then I change my namespace to a kubesystem. It's been changed there, and if I do get pods, it's going to list. It is going to list me everything from the kubesystem namespace. Then I just do like cd hyphen, like we change the directory, right? If I do cd hyphen, I go back to the old directory. This is the prime directory I have, but yeah. So if I do ns hyphen, it kind of takes me to the default namespace now, correct? So this kind of things become very easy for me to kind of change the namespace, work on it, and keep moving, keep moving as fast as I can. Okay, then there's a thing called tree. So this can kind of give you a tree view of the given objects, what you might have. So let's install this tree plugin now. Let me see if, okay, let's go back. Yeah. So trees there, we already have a deployment created. So let me just do a tree directly on that. So let me just do a tree of this. And as you can see, it kind of gives me a deployment, replica set, and the pod. This is a kind of a view, kind of a hierarchy for me. Then if I change my image on the deployment there, and again, if I do a tree view, you can see that it's kind of giving me a tree view and this pod is not ready. So it's kind of in the false state here, right? So this kind of things become very easy for you to, when you kind of trying to find out the relationship and so on here. So that can help you there. Let's look at this is a very interesting one, the score. So if you have some YAML configuration and you want to find out how good this YAML file is, what is this YAML file good to go in production or no? So how we can find out that? That's where this score thing would come into picture. And let's see what kind of interesting output it can give you. So I've installed this one, and currently if I look at deployment.yaml file, it's a very simple YAML configuration which I have. Just have a replica set, some pod template and so on. But now if I do a score of this, correct? You can see that it is giving me a lot of critical things, right? Which you might not even thought about, right? That, okay, this YAML file which I have can really have some security impact or some issues, right? So as you can see, that kind of tells you there is no security context here. There is no resource definition here. There is no image pull policy, network pod policy. So this kind of tool can be very easy for you to find out, okay, is the configuration file which I am writing, it is really a production ready file or not, right? And that kind of help you to play with things. Hope this makes sense. Then we have the next plugin called Node Shell here. So now this is very interesting. So suppose you are running the cluster of a managed environment. So suppose I went ahead and created a cluster on GKE or DigitalOcean managed Kubernetes cluster, and it's difficult for me to kind of do a SSH into those nodes and see what's happening there. So this node shell command, what it can do is it can take you to that particular node by doing an exec and all that thing behind the scene. But you would be in that node directly without even doing SSH to that machine. So this can again be very interesting one to use. So let's go ahead and install this. So we have installed that, and let's find out what nodes I have. Currently, I have only one node, and I'm on that node directly. But idea is same. You find out the node's name, and then you can do kubectl node shell, and it would take you to that node there. So if I run this command, I would kind of get into that particular master node, and then I can see what in that node. So if you're on cloud and you want to go to that node and see what's happening, you can use this node shell and log in there and do some whatever your research there. Let me see if there are any questions. Meanwhile, okay, yes, all the plugins would work in all the environment here. Okay, so I think we are good for now, not to bother too much. Okay, so let's look at the next one is Popeye, which is a very interesting tool, and I would really suggest that you check out this tool, Popeye CLI. Yeah, it's a resource sanitizer, and it can do more than what I'm actually doing. It's going to show you now. So let me show the simple example, then I can tell you what may be possible with this. So what I'll do is I'm going to install this plugin first. And now if I do the kubectl popeye command, if I run this command, let me clear the screen. This kind of tells me the score, and it tells me, okay, because currently, let me just do one thing. So, get pause, kubectl delete, Nginx. Yeah. So I'll delete my deployment now, and if I do this command again, it kind of gives me the score of my cluster to be 95, and the score is being coming in different. It just kind of does a scanning of your all the resources and tells you how good it is and so on here. Yeah, so like as you can see, it's nothing to report for deployment, HP, and all that stuff for now. Now, if I do a pod creation, this pod is nothing but a simple pod here. Let me apply this pod here. And if I run this, let me just have the pod running. Let me just check that. Yeah. And now if I do this command, you can see the score has come down. Okay, score is still 95. So I think the problem what we had earlier, the same problem still exists, but it's kind of giving you different things. Let's see. It started here, and there should be some warning which kind of taken the 5 point out of us, right? So where is it? 100. Yeah, so there is this unnamed port 80. Container could be running as a root user. Check out the policy here. Yeah. So some of these things are, they would take away certain of your points there, and they would then give you a report. So you can run this tool and get the scanning. And what you can do further is you can kind of take this tool, run it as a cron job. You can run it every day, and then you can dump this data into your S3 bucket, and then you can get the report every other day or every day, whatever you would like. So these kind of things would be very easier for you. So as an admin, you can run this tool every day and say, okay, if some developer had made some things not so good, right? You will get the score, and you can identify what cluster state is in, and then play with it. Yeah. Then the next tool here is Ktail, which is like all the logs. You can tail the logs of the different combinations here. So what we'll do with this particular thing is we would basically install this particular plugin. Let me just do that, and then we would get a deployment, and we would then set up the tailing of all the pods of that particular deployment configuration here. And if you look at the help, you will just amazed to see there are so many options, I believe, are there. Let me just do a help here. So there or not, okay, this is okay. I think the other example which I kind of referring here, but that's okay. You can we can still get some useful information from here. So I'm going to do a deployment creation. I'll do a tmux now, just to kind of have two terminals in with me. And in this, I would run this particular command here, which is kind of I'm going to tail all the logs for that particular deployment here. Now I'll go to find out the pod's IP here. This is my pod IP, and if I do a curl on this IP, let me do for one of the other one as well. Yeah, and now if I go back here, I would find the logs coming from different pods in one go, right? So that can kind of help me to kind of find all the logs together. I can group the logs by the namespace and the other parameters which you can use. So this kind of things can help you to find out logs of a group. So yeah, that can be useful. Yeah, so now let's see if I want to find the allocated resources in my cluster, how I can do that. So for that, we have this particular plugin here. So let me install that. And if I do the view allocation now, okay, it's view allocations, I believe. Yeah. So you can see that I can look at the resource allocations, requested, limit, and so on. With this particular command, I can group them by the namespace as well. So that way I can find out for a given namespace how much total memory was requested and so on there. So you are admin of a large cluster, you have created different namespaces, and you want to find out what's the current uses of each namespace. So this tool can be a handy. Of course, we have all the other UIs as well, which you might want to play with. But here is a simple tool which can be used here. Okay, so we look at the last tool here, which is RBAC. This is, I really find it very interesting here. So generally we create these users and we give them some role bindings and so on. And there is no direct easy way using which I can find out, okay, this user has what kind of roles and role bindings. It is really a challenging task for me to kind of find it out. Correct. So how I can do that? So for that purpose, we have this RBAC. I think I pick up the name, not the correct one here, but yeah, here is the name. So RBAC lookup is the right name of the plugin. So I have already created, I have anchor user, and that anchor user has certain role in the role bindings. So I can show you that. So I have this anchor user in my kubeconfig file. Those steps are there, in which I have showed everything, but that's not kind of do that now. So we have this anchor user, and for that user anchor user, I have its private key assert data, and I have a context for that. And then I have this role for the deployment manager for a given namespace, and then I have this role binding here. Role binding, yeah. And here I have assigned that particular role to my user. Now, if you look at, if I just want to find out, okay, this anchor user has what kind of role and role binding, it is kind of a difficult for me to kind of just find out easily with the typical commands of Kubernetes. But if I install this plugin and run this command here, it can give me easy mapping, saying that anchor user is the scope of Cloudera and has this role. So it's very easy to be kind of for me to find this out. Yeah. So these kind of things, these kind of tools or plugins are available, and of course you can explore the hundreds more are there, right? I just picked up few of them to kind of cover in our time frame, but I find them really useful, and they can be used in day-to-day life or your environment, whichever you are using now. Yeah. So anywhere you have Kubernetes, you can use that. So let's go and check if there are any questions. Let me unshare my screen for now. So what kind of things we have? kubectx are really handy. Other comes with it today. Yeah. Things are on top of a list. Example, good one. Can we use these plugins? I'm not too sure about whether you can use them in the exam or not. I think if you remember the endpoint, you can do that. You can remember the command to install kube, the tool and so on. You should be able to do that. I think anywhere you have Kubernetes, I believe these things are going to work. So if you can run the command of kubectl, you can use these plugins, I believe. Yeah, so I mean, in a way, they are not, these tools are not audited there. You need to be careful, but you can look at the source code, of course, right? So these plugins come with the open source, right? So you can look at the source code and see what's there, or you can write your own plugin as well, right? So that way you can kind of say, okay, maybe that plugin is there on the Git repo. You can fork it out within a company, or you can get it validated, and then you start using that. So that's fine, I believe. That shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, so I think yeah, that's all from my side. Any other questions you guys might have? Okay, let me see. Can we expect? Yeah, we are currently building. So yeah, so currently we have spent about actually a few months' time in building this platform. So this is we're going to launch to all of our users as we kind of go further. So within this platform now we can provision the cluster, and so basically if somebody kind of takes our course, they'll get a cluster running on the environment, and this is like an easy way of doing the labs and so on, right? So for example, if I want to run any command, I can just click on this. I can have, okay, there is error coming there, right? But idea is that you can read the content, you can watch the videos, and you can go over the content simultaneously. So our primary effort has kind of gone into building this platform in last few months, and we are going to launch this thing for all of our users in this month only. And post that, we would work on the CKS course. So yeah, that's kind of what we plan to do that. So yeah, we just kind of spend our time to build this platform. What you just saw as a demo, I think I shared my screen, but let me quickly share. Yeah, so this is what we have. I was telling you, right? You can kind of come to the platform, may cluster up, do the hands-on labs, watch the videos, and then continue. So we spent our time on this, and after launching this one, we'll work on the CKS, and then we'll take it out in some time. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I think that's all. Feel free to reach out. We will share the recording of this session along with the slides in a couple of days. And I believe you would know that there is a Yoga Byte uh, training and certification happening at end of this month. So feel free to join that as well. It's a free event, and then somebody from Yoga Byte is going to train you in that distributed SQL stuff. So if you're interested, you can join that. Yep, I think that's it from my side as well. Hope it was useful, and we're getting the comments now. So yeah, feel free to leave the comments on the website as well, on the meetup page, and so if we can get more people on board. And of course, if you want to speak up sometime, please feel free to kind of come and speak up. Like Murli came forward and really gave her a good session. If you know something, want to share, please come forward. Yeah. Thank you guys. See you then next time. Okay. Bye bye.